Hey guys, how's it going? Dudey here. I'm back with another video. Today we are going to look into the unspeakable horrors of Charles Manson and the Manson family. Now what I'm going to do with this video, guys, I'm going to break it down into three parts. We're going to have the early life of Charles Manson, followed by the Manson family, followed by the crimes of the Manson family. For those of you that don't know, Charles Manson is a man that manipulated a group of people and brainwashed them into becoming killers. His own cult, the Manson family. So let's begin with the early life of Charles Manson. When Charles Manson was born, he was unwanted, he was illegitimate, he was born to a young prostitute. It is even believed that Charles Manson's mother once offered to sell a young baby Charles to a childless waitress in exchange for just a pitcher of beer. He was disowned from a very young age and simply passed off to whatever relative would look after him. Left to his own devices, he was on the streets a hell of a lot, and because he was on the streets a hell of a lot, he started to become savvy with some bad people and he got involved in a lot of crime. By the time he was a teenager, he was involved in many armed robberies, which led to him having many stints in the juvenile institution. It was here that he was sexually abused and brutalized. It is thought that what happened to him in these juvenile institutions played heavily into his psyche in later life. In the 1950s, he began pimping out women from an apartment in Hollywood. And if you think of the characteristics of a pimp, it's all about intimidation, entrapment, manipulation, and control. All of these qualities and traits would be used in later life to create the Manson family. In 1960, he was jailed once again, this time for a 7-year stint. He decided to use this time to expand his thinking and expand his mind, and he stumbled across a Scientologist who taught him everything that he knew. And it's believed that Charles Manson sat through 150 hours of Scientology auditing, which is like counseling. This simply warped Charles Manson's worldview and his mind further and further into what would one day be seen clearly as insanity. Charles Manson used his new way of thinking to craft music. He wrote his own songs and played guitar within the prison walls. He would often perform to other inmates and prison guards. He was released in 1967. He emerged into a brand new world. Long gone was the world of the 1950s, where sex was suppressed. He was surrounded by sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and it was the exact environment he needed to spread the word of this new vision that he had in his mind. The thing with the hippie era was, which Charles Manson very quickly found, if you walked around preaching with great articulation and clarity, you could soon develop a following. And a following he most certainly developed. A following he went on to call the Manson family. To begin with, the Manson family consisted of a few women, girls with damaged pasts looking for a father figure, a figure that Charles Manson would happily adopt for them. Charles Manson purchased a bus, a bit like a school bus, and drove around state to state collecting new members of the Manson family. Whilst this was going on, he was actually trying to pursue his music career, going to labels, but what he found was they were rejecting him, just like he'd been rejected as a child by his own mother. And this infuriated Charles. Once again, society was shunning him. Charles decided to set up camp at an abandoned old movie set, the Spahn Movie Ranch site. This would be home to the Manson family for months, and eventually home to a group of merciless killers. By this time, the Manson family consisted of both men and women. Sex was free and open. Everyone that was a member seemed to have a troubled past, a reliance on drugs, and most definitely a fascination, reliance, and love for Charles Manson. Charles's method of manipulating these people to think the way he thought was that he basically brainwashed them into reverting back to a childlike state. By doing this, it allowed him to instill his methods, his thoughts, and his beliefs onto them in such a strong way that he managed to even convince the members of the Manson family that he was a reincarnation of Jesus Christ. But not only that, he was also the devil incarnate. 2 in 1. Charles Manson was obsessed and convinced that there was a race war on the horizon. He referred to this as the helter-skelter. It was his own apocalypse, his own end of days. His plan was to build a new civilization in the desert whilst the race war raged, and then basically once the race war was over, Charles Manson and his civilization would rise up out of the desert and take over whoever had won the race war and essentially rule the world. Now, psychologists have studied this and studied Charles Manson and believe that he didn't actually believe this to be the case. They think that actually Charles Manson was incredibly intelligent and used this story, this made-up scenario, as a manipulation tactic to gain further control over the Manson family. I mean, you just think, every religion has some form of apocalypse, some form of end of days to keep everyone in line. You know, in Christianity, when the end of days come, if you've been a good Christian, you'll go up to heaven. If you've been bad, you'll go to hell. As the months went on, there was a little bit of unrest within the ranch and things were starting to spiral out of Manson's control. A few people left and he felt he really needed to do something to really grasp control of the rest of the family. His world was starting to unravel, and Manson even shot a dealer believing that he was part of this Black Panther gang. So Manson was becoming more erratic with his actions and more deadlier by the day. Which leads me into the crimes of the Manson family. It was believed that drugs were being sold, and there was rumours floating around that there was a weird cult at this ranch, so it got the police's intrigue, and Charles Manson and a few of the others were arrested. Whilst they were being questioned, a man presented himself to bail out Charles Manson. Fast forward a few months, Charles Manson and the Manson family turned up to this man's house demanding money, trying to extort this man. And when he refused, the Manson family executed him. They even drew a paw on the wall in blood to try and frame the Black Panther gang, fueling this race war ideology. This didn't really gain too much traction though, but a month later the Manson family would commit crimes that the world would sit up and pay attention to and never ever forget. Instructed by Charles Manson himself, a few select members of the Manson family hit the Hollywood Hills and attacked a household that was the home of Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate. Sharon Tate was heavily pregnant at the time. Roman Polanski was not at the home, but she had 4 other guests. The Manson family cut the phone lines, jumped the fence, went through an open window and massacred everyone inside, and the 2 that tried to escape and were chased down and stabbed to death on the lawn, with no remorse or mercy. In fact, one of the killers boasted to police that Sharon Tate begged for mercy, saying, "Please let me live so I can have my baby." The killer simply replied, "I owe you no mercy, you are going to die." Another killer complained that her hand was hurting because the knife was going straight through to the bone. After the murders were committed, the Manson family fled back to the ranch, told Charles Manson of the murders, and went to sleep. The next morning they had a long lay-in, and in the afternoon switched on the news to see that they were the first story, the big headline of the day, and the Manson family sat there and laughed through the entire news piece. That night, the Manson family would strike again. This time though, Charles Manson would accompany them. He felt that they messed up the previous night by nearly allowing 2 of them to escape. So he wanted to make sure that they were killed more efficiently and without any hiccups. So Charles Manson drove through the streets, picked out a house. They even planned to break into a church and hang the pastor from the cross. Fortunately for the pastor, the church was locked. However, 2 people that night were not going to be as fortunate. The LaBiancas would be the victims of the Manson family that night. Manson left the rest of the Manson family in the car, went ahead, went inside, tied up the family and came back out and said, they're tied up, now go kill them. And Charles Manson drove off, leaving the Manson family to go inside and once again maniacally stab them to death. But this time the husband had the letters W-A war carved into his stomach. They wrote all over the walls and wrote the words Helter Skelter, the Beatles song that Charles Manson believed was a sign of the upcoming apocalypse, written on the fridge in blood. So in one weekend there were 7 nightmarish murders committed by the Manson family. Technically not by Charles Manson himself, however the brainwashing, manipulation and control he had over these people led to the orchestration of the murders. Manson was clearly a master of manipulation and crafted a devoted, murderous cult that would do anything, including killing, in his name. Charles Manson, leader of the Manson family. So there we go, guys. What do you think of Charles Manson and the Manson family? I would love to know what you think. There is also some very intriguing interviews with Charles Manson that began 12 years after the beginning of his incarceration. If you'd like me to go through those, please let me know down below. Any video suggestions, let me know down below. Yesterday's video, a load of you were saying Charles Manson, Manson family, Charles Manson, Manson family. Here we are, guys. I want to create the content that you want to see within the supernatural, the paranormal, the true crime world. Once again, guys, the growth on this channel has been insane, so I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really do appreciate it. If you'd like to become a patron, the link is down below. It's an amazing way to support creators. Another thing I do, Twitch TV, twitch.tv/Dudey Rhino. You know all about it by now. If you want to, go and check it out. Thank you so much, guys. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate your support. Like, share, and subscribe. Sweet one, geese.